The millionaire lived a life that many could only dream of. His name was Robert, and he had earned his fortune through years of hard work, smart decisions, and a relentless drive to succeed. From the outside, his life looked perfect: an elegant mansion on the hill, luxury cars parked in the driveway, expensive clothes, and vacations in places most people could only see in magazines. But beneath all the glamour and wealth, Robert's life was more complicated than anyone imagined. Every morning, he woke up at the same time, just as the sun was beginning to rise, and he would look out over the city from his penthouse window. The streets below were already buzzing with life, people rushing to work, children heading to school, and cars honking in the distance. From up there, it all seemed like a tiny world moving in slow motion, and Robert often felt a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. He had everything, yet sometimes he wondered if he was missing something important in life, something money could never buy. Despite his fortune, Robert's day-to-day life was full of routines. He had a personal assistant who managed his schedule, a chef who prepared his meals with perfection, and drivers who took him wherever he needed to go. He attended meetings with business partners, made investment decisions that could change the lives of thousands, and was constantly surrounded by people who admired him, or at least pretended to. Friends, family, and colleagues often told him how lucky he was, how enviable his life seemed, but Robert knew that most of them only saw the surface. Few people ever saw the lonely hours he spent in his private study, thinking about the people he could trust and the ones he could not. Robert was married to a woman named Elizabeth, who appeared as graceful and perfect as the life they led. She was elegant, charming, and always dressed immaculately, attending social events with him and maintaining the image of a happy couple. Outwardly, they seemed like a power couple, united, successful, and admired by everyone around them. But behind closed doors, their relationship had cracks that no one could see. Robert had begun noticing small things that didn't quite fit, the occasional strange taste in his food, subtle hints of secrecy, and Elizabeth's inexplicable mood swings. At first, he brushed them off, thinking that stress or fatigue could explain these small oddities. His home reflected his personality, organized, meticulous, and a little cold. Each room was furnished with taste and luxury, but the atmosphere was quiet, almost too quiet, except for the soft hum of the city outside. Even in such an environment, Robert often felt alone. He had wealth, status, and influence, but he missed genuine human connection. People admired him, yes, but admiration was different from love, loyalty, or true friendship. He had learned over the years that in the world of the rich and powerful, trust was rare, and deceit was common. One of Robert's few pleasures was walking through his private garden early in the morning. The roses were always in full bloom, and the sound of the fountain provided a calm escape from the busy life he led. Yet even here, he could not fully relax. Something always lingered in the back of his mind, a nagging sense that not everything was as perfect as it appeared. He wondered if his wife truly cared for him, or if she was more interested in the wealth and status that came with his name. Sometimes, he felt a faint suspicion creeping into his thoughts, though he quickly dismissed it, telling himself that these were just idle fears. Robert's life was a mix of extremes. Business meetings could be intense, filled with negotiation and strategy, while his personal life was calm but distant, almost routine. He had everything anyone could dream of, yet a part of him felt incomplete. That's why, even with all his wealth and power, Robert relied on subtle observations, intuition, and quiet moments of reflection to make sense of the world around him. He had learned to notice the small things, the way someone looked at him, the slight hesitation in their words, or a change in their behavior, because those small things often revealed the truth that others tried to hide. In public, Robert was confident, composed, and admired. But in private, he was cautious, wary, and sometimes lonely. He knew that wealth could protect him from many things, but it could not protect him from betrayal, secrets, or heartbreak. That underlying tension, the sense that something was not quite right, created a quiet unease in his life, a feeling that would soon lead to events no one could predict. For now, he continued his routines, lived in luxury, and put on the appearance of a happy life, unaware that the truth was closer than he imagined and that it would soon arrive in a way that would change everything he thought he knew about trust, loyalty, and love. After weeks of tension, investigation, and confrontation, the mansion was finally quiet. The storm that had upended Robert's life had passed, leaving behind clarity, understanding, and a new perspective. Sitting alone in his study, he reflected on everything that had happened, the subtle signs he had ignored, the courage of the young girl who had spoken the truth, the betrayal he had faced, and the decisions he had made in the aftermath. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of calm, not because the pain was gone, but because he understood it. Robert realized that life often presents lessons in the most unexpected ways. He had spent years focused on wealth, status, and appearances, believing that success could protect him from harm. Yet, the experience had shown him a truth far more valuable: no amount of money or power can shield a person from deceit or betrayal. Awareness, vigilance, and courage are far more important than the trappings of luxury. He understood that life is fragile, trust is delicate, and clarity is a gift that must be nurtured. He thought about Elizabeth, the woman he had once loved and trusted completely. The betrayal had been painful, yes, but it had also been illuminating. He realized that people are complex, and motives are often hidden beneath layers of habit, fear, or selfishness. Understanding that did not excuse the actions, but it allowed him to process the experience without being consumed by anger. He had learned that holding on to bitterness would only weigh him down, whereas learning from the experience could strengthen him. Lila, the young assistant who had noticed what no one else did, had been a quiet force in his journey toward truth. Her courage reminded Robert that even a small voice can create a profound impact. Sometimes, the people who observe quietly, who notice the details others ignore, are the ones who illuminate hidden dangers. Gratitude and respect for her insight filled him. Without her, he might still have been blind to the reality lurking in his own home. Robert reflected on the subtle ways life communicates truths. The unusual pauses in his meals, the faint taste differences, the hidden signals in everyday interactions, they had all been messages, if only he had been attentive enough to listen. This realization became a guiding principle for him: never ignore the small signs, never dismiss intuition, and never underestimate the value of observation. These lessons were worth more than any business deal, luxury possession, or social accolade he had ever achieved. He also considered the nature of trust. Trust is not a guarantee, Robert thought, it is a choice, continually reaffirmed by honesty, integrity, and respect. He had learned that blind trust can be dangerous, and vigilance does not equal paranoia, it equals wisdom. The experience had strengthened his ability to recognize patterns, analyze situations, and make decisions with clarity rather than assumption. In this way, betrayal became a teacher, guiding him toward a more aware and resilient life. The moral of his journey crystallized in his mind. Life is unpredictable, and people are rarely exactly what they seem. Appearances can be deceiving, and even the closest relationships require attention, observation, and conscious effort to maintain. When deception arises, courage and careful reflection are essential tools for navigating the aftermath. Robert realized that facing the truth, no matter how painful, was far more empowering than remaining in denial or pretending everything was fine. By the time night fell, Robert felt a sense of peace. He understood that the mansion, the wealth, and the appearances of a perfect life were not what truly mattered. What mattered was clarity, awareness, and the ability to act decisively when faced with uncertainty. He had survived deception, confronted it, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. The lessons he had learned were deeply personal, yet universal in their value: trust wisely, observe carefully, act courageously, and never ignore the subtle truths that life presents. As he looked out at the city lights sparkling below, Robert felt gratitude for the painful lessons, for the courage of those who had helped him, and for the opportunity to move forward with insight and strength. He knew the past could not be changed, but the future was his to shape. And with that thought, he smiled quietly to himself, knowing that the truth, once revealed and faced, was the greatest freedom of all. After days of careful observation, Lila could no longer keep her suspicion to herself. Every meal, every pause, every subtle sign had built a pattern in her mind that she could no longer ignore. The truth was no longer just a possibility, it was real, and Robert needed to know. But approaching him was terrifying. She knew the weight of her words could change everything, and she also knew that if she was wrong, she could risk her position in the house, or worse, make life unbearable. Yet, deep down, she knew she could not remain silent. One quiet afternoon, when the mansion was unusually calm, Lila found Robert alone in his study. He was reviewing contracts, the golden afternoon light falling across his desk, making the papers glimmer. To an outsider, he looked composed, in control, as always. But Lila knew better. Beneath that calm exterior was a man who had unknowingly been living in subtle danger. She approached cautiously, her heart racing, and waited for him to notice her presence. "Robert," she began softly, her voice careful and steady, "I need to tell you something important. It's about your meals, and your wife." Robert looked up, slightly startled. "Lila? What is it? Is everything okay?" His voice was calm, but there was a hint of curiosity mixed with concern. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. "I've noticed things," she said, glancing around to make sure no one could overhear. "Strange things in your food, small changes in taste, subtle effects on your health. At first, I thought it was nothing, but I've observed a pattern. And I'm afraid, it's not random." Robert furrowed his brow. "What do you mean? Are you saying someone is deliberately affecting my food?" "Yes," Lila said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's your wife. She's the one adding something. I know it sounds impossible, but I've watched carefully, and I'm certain. You're not imagining it. It's happening, and I had to tell you." For a moment, the room was silent. Robert's eyes widened, disbelief and shock mixing together. He leaned back in his chair, trying to process the words. His mind raced, flipping through memories, meals, and small moments he had brushed off as unimportant. Every pause at the dinner table, every unusual taste, every fleeting discomfort, all of it now formed a frightening picture he could no longer ignore. I don't believe it," he whispered, almost to himself. "Elizabeth? My wife? How, why would she?" His voice trailed off, unable to form the words. "I know it's hard to believe," Lila said gently, "but I've been careful. I've watched, and I've noticed patterns too consistent to ignore. I wouldn't say anything if I wasn't certain. You deserve to know before it's too late." Robert sat in stunned silence, the magnitude of her revelation sinking in. He felt a storm of emotions, shock, anger, fear, and betrayal, all colliding at once. He thought about their life together, the mansion, the appearances of a perfect marriage, and realized how little he truly knew. The image of Elizabeth as a loving, loyal partner began to crumble in his mind. The trust he had taken for granted, the comfort of their shared life, everything suddenly seemed fragile, tainted by doubt. Lila's courage struck him as deeply as her warning. She had risked so much to bring him the truth, and he knew that without her, he might still be blind to what was happening right under his nose. For the first time, Robert understood that wealth and power could not protect him from betrayal. The danger had been hidden in plain sight, in the very person he had loved and trusted the most. Finally, he spoke, his voice firm but shaken. "Thank you, Lila. I don't know what to say. You've done the right thing. I can't ignore this. I need to find out for myself, and I need to confront her." Lila nodded, relief mixing with the lingering tension. "I thought you should know before it got worse," she said quietly. "I just want you to be safe." Robert stared out of the study window, his mind racing with questions, plans, and the reality of the betrayal. A chapter of his life that he had taken for granted had suddenly become a maze of suspicion, secrecy, and danger. What had seemed like small, insignificant moments were now clear warning signs of something much deeper. That day, the calm surface of Robert's life was shattered. The revelation had arrived, unexpected and undeniable, and nothing would ever be the same. He realized that the truth had been there all along, hidden behind smiles, meals, and appearances, but thanks to Lila, it was finally out in the open. Now, the next steps were his, and they would determine not only the fate of his marriage but the course of his life itself. Robert could hardly believe what he had just heard. The words Lila had spoken echoed in his mind, louder and louder with every passing second. "It's your wife. She's adding something to your food." His first reaction was disbelief. No matter how strange the signs, how unusual the moments he had noticed, the thought that Elizabeth, the woman he had loved and trusted for years, could betray him so deeply seemed impossible. He sank into his chair, his hands gripping the arms tightly. The mansion, which had always felt like a sanctuary, suddenly seemed cold and unfamiliar. Every memory of their life together, the dinners, the celebrations, the quiet evenings in the study, began to flicker in his mind, each one now tainted by suspicion. How could someone so close, someone he had allowed into the deepest corners of his life, do this to him? His heart raced, and a heavy weight settled on his chest. Denial came first. Robert told himself that Lila must be mistaken, that she had misunderstood, or that the signs she had observed were coincidences. Elizabeth would never, could never, he repeated in his mind like a mantra. It was easier to cling to that thought than to confront the terrifying possibility that his life, as he knew it, was built on deception. He had always believed in the honesty of those closest to him. How could it be that he had been so blind? He began replaying every meal in his mind, every taste that had seemed unusual, every moment of slight discomfort. Each instant seemed clearer now, each pause, each hesitation, each odd expression from Elizabeth. The pieces were aligning, but denial whispered louder, it couldn't be true. She loved him. They had shared so much together. Could all of that be false? Could the woman he had trusted most be capable of such betrayal? Robert's mind swung between disbelief and suspicion. He wanted to accuse Elizabeth immediately, to demand answers, but another part of him resisted. What if he was wrong? What if Lila had been mistaken, or worse, had misinterpreted harmless actions as malicious? The thought of confronting his wife without certainty made him pause, leaving him suspended in a state of anxious tension. At night, Robert could not sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing the faint hum of the city outside. Every creak of the mansion, every quiet step in the hallway, made his heart jump. He replayed Lila's words over and over, each repetition chiseling away at the walls of denial he had built around himself. His mind refused to rest, imagining what might have been happening right under his nose, while he remained oblivious. In the following days, Robert observed Elizabeth more closely, almost unconsciously. He watched the way she moved in the kitchen, the subtle gestures she made when serving him food, and the way she interacted with staff. His disbelief fought against the mounting evidence. Each small inconsistency, each fleeting hesitation, each unexplained action she took seemed more significant now. The realization that he had missed these signals for so long fueled both his anger and his fear. He found himself questioning everything, their conversations, her smiles, even the little affectionate gestures that once brought him comfort. Could any of it have been genuine? The thought was unbearable, yet he could not ignore it. Denial and suspicion waged a war inside him, leaving him restless and anxious. He had spent years building a life based on trust, and now every foundation felt shaky. For the first time, Robert understood the fragility of trust. He had always believed that love and loyalty were constants in life, but now he realized they could be deceptive, hidden beneath layers of appearances. He had thought himself wise, experienced, and careful, yet he had been blind to the danger that lurked closest to him. The truth, when revealed, was both shocking and undeniable, but his mind refused to accept it fully. In the quiet moments, when he was alone, Robert allowed himself to feel the full weight of betrayal. His emotions swung wildly, shock, denial, anger, fear, and sadness all collided in a chaotic storm. He had to find a way to face the reality before him, to uncover the truth with clarity rather than imagination. He knew that denial could only protect him for so long. Eventually, the truth would demand attention, and he would have to confront it, no matter how painful. Robert's life, once orderly and predictable, was now suspended in uncertainty. The revelation had cracked open the door to a world of questions, and denial was only the first of many obstacles he would face. But one thing was clear: he could no longer ignore the signs, and the confrontation with Elizabeth, when it came, would change everything. After days of shock and denial, Robert realized that he could no longer remain passive. Lila's warning had planted a seed of suspicion that refused to fade. He knew that if there was even a possibility that Elizabeth was tampering with his food, he had to uncover the truth for himself. The thought of betrayal had ignited a fire inside him, a need for clarity, a need to see beyond appearances and understand the reality hiding behind the perfect facade of his marriage. Robert began his investigation cautiously. He did not want Elizabeth to suspect anything, not yet. He started with subtle observation, paying close attention to everything that happened in the kitchen and dining areas. He noted the way meals were prepared, who handled the ingredients, and the way dishes were served. Each movement, each glance, each gesture was catalogued in his mind. He even began keeping a discrete mental log of times, temperatures, and tastes, trying to spot patterns or inconsistencies that could confirm or refute Lila's alarming claim. He noticed that some dishes seemed perfectly normal at first, but there was always something slightly off, a faint bitterness, a delayed sensation of unease, or a subtle heaviness after eating. At first, he tried to convince himself it was his imagination, but as the instances grew more frequent, doubt turned into concern, and concern grew into a determined resolve. Robert also started listening more attentively during meals. He would ask simple, casual questions, watching Elizabeth's responses carefully. Did she flinch? Did she hesitate? Did her eyes reveal something hidden behind her words? The more he observed, the more he realized that subtle clues were all around him. Elizabeth's composure was almost perfect, but perfection sometimes hides the truth in plain sight. Lila assisted him quietly, offering small hints when needed. She would point out minor details that Robert might have overlooked, the way Elizabeth added ingredients to certain dishes, the timing of her actions, and the subtle changes in the environment whenever she was near the kitchen. Her insight became invaluable, helping Robert connect dots that had seemed unrelated. Every observation brought him closer to confirming what he had feared all along. Robert also began discreetly documenting his experiences. He kept a private journal, recording the unusual sensations after meals, odd behaviors, and strange occurrences. Each entry painted a clearer picture of the hidden pattern behind the seemingly normal routines of the household. The mansion, which had once been a sanctuary of calm and luxury, now felt like a place of investigation, a chessboard where every move mattered and every gesture could reveal a secret. He became more methodical over time. He experimented with food, subtly asking the chef to prepare certain dishes in ways that could reveal anomalies, and observing Elizabeth's reactions. He even started paying attention to small details that had previously seemed irrelevant, the way she touched certain ingredients, the timing of her presence in the kitchen, and the expressions she made when he complimented or criticized a meal. Slowly, the picture began to emerge, and it was far more unsettling than he had imagined. The investigation also made Robert more cautious in his personal habits. He stopped leaving meals unattended, became vigilant about what he ate, and began monitoring even the smallest details of his surroundings. Every movement, every conversation, and every action was now filtered through the lens of suspicion. This heightened awareness was exhausting, but Robert knew that uncovering the truth was essential, not just for his peace of mind, but for his safety and dignity. As the days passed, the evidence grew stronger. Small coincidences became patterns, and subtle anomalies became undeniable signs. Robert realized that the revelation Lila had delivered was not an exaggeration or misunderstanding. The betrayal he had feared was real, carefully hidden behind Elizabeth's charm and the outward perfection of their lives. By the end of this phase of investigation, Robert was no longer a man living in denial. He had moved beyond suspicion to clarity, armed with observations, evidence, and the knowledge that the confrontation to come would be unavoidable. The stage was set for the next, inevitable step, facing the truth head-on, confronting Elizabeth, and uncovering the motives behind her shocking actions. The mansion, once a symbol of comfort and control, had transformed into a stage for revelation, where secrets could no longer remain hidden, and Robert's life would never be the same. The day of confrontation had arrived, though Robert had dreaded it for weeks. After careful observation and discreet investigation, he knew that he could no longer postpone facing Elizabeth. The mansion, usually a place of calm and luxury, felt tense and heavy that morning, as if it too understood the storm about to unfold. Robert had spent hours rehearsing what he would say, yet he knew that no plan could fully prepare him for the emotions he would face. Elizabeth entered the room, unaware, or pretending to be, of the storm brewing behind Robert's composed demeanor. She smiled politely, her posture graceful, the picture of the perfect wife. But Robert noticed the slightest tension in her shoulders, a flicker in her eyes that betrayed her awareness of something amiss. The years of familiarity between them made him acutely aware of her habits, her expressions, and the subtle signs of guilt. "Elizabeth," Robert began, his voice calm but firm, "we need to talk." Her smile faltered just a fraction. "Of course, Robert. What's on your mind?" Robert took a deep breath, steadying himself against the wave of emotions threatening to overwhelm him, anger, betrayal, fear, and hurt all colliding at once. "I've noticed things, patterns, subtle changes in my meals, in my health, and in our daily life. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But after careful observation, I can no longer ignore it. I know what you've been doing." Elizabeth's face remained composed, but a shadow of something darker crossed her eyes. "Robert, I don't understand," she said, her tone measured, almost rehearsed. "You do understand," he replied, voice rising slightly, controlled but intense. "I know you've been adding something to my food. It's deliberate. I've seen the patterns, the timing, the moments when meals felt different. I've noticed the subtle effects it's had on me. And I know it's you." For a moment, silence filled the room. The words hung between them like an unbreakable tension, heavy and suffocating. Robert's mind raced with the countless times he had brushed off minor anomalies, the strange tastes, the odd pauses, the fleeting discomforts he had once dismissed. Now everything pointed clearly in one direction. Elizabeth's composure finally cracked, just enough to reveal the flicker of fear he had anticipated. "Robert, it's not what you think," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "No," he interrupted, his tone sharp but controlled. "It is exactly what I think. I have watched, I have observed, and I have documented. Lila warned me, but I needed to see for myself. This betrayal is not hidden anymore. You cannot deny it." Her lips pressed together, and she glanced briefly away, her silence speaking volumes. The truth, once concealed behind charm and grace, was now undeniable. The power dynamic in the room shifted. Robert, usually patient and composed, now held the undeniable upper hand. "I trusted you," he said quietly, the anger and hurt mingling in his voice. "I built a life with you, shared everything with you, and all the while, I was being deceived. Why?" Elizabeth's eyes softened, and for the first time, she allowed herself to reveal her motives, her voice low and hesitant. I felt trapped. I didn't know how to express myself. I thought, maybe this would make things better, but I never wanted to hurt you." Robert's chest tightened. Words of betrayal, excuses, and hidden motives collided in his mind. His heart ached, not just from the act itself, but from the realization that someone so close could choose secrecy over honesty. "You've crossed a line," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Trust is the foundation of everything, and it's broken now. I need to know that I am safe, and that I can trust my own life and home again." The room seemed to shrink around them, heavy with tension, pain, and unspoken truths. Elizabeth, finally stripped of her defenses, met his gaze. The confrontation had forced both of them to face reality. The life they had built together was built on appearances, not truth. The delicate balance of love, trust, and security had been shattered. Robert realized that this moment, painful as it was, marked the beginning of clarity. No longer would he ignore subtle signs or brush off discomforts. The confrontation had revealed hidden motives, secrets, and weaknesses, but it had also illuminated the path forward. He could choose to rebuild, to seek answers, and to protect himself from further deception. As he stepped back, allowing space for both their emotions, Robert understood that the confrontation was not just about accusation, it was about truth. And for the first time in weeks, he felt the sharp clarity of awareness. The revelation had arrived, and now the real decisions, the choices that would shape the rest of his life, were his alone. The confrontation had left the mansion steeped in silence, the kind that feels heavy with unspoken words and lingering tension. Robert sat alone in his study, staring out at the city skyline, the golden light of sunset painting everything in shades of gold and orange. He felt drained, not from physical exertion, but from the emotional storm that had consumed him over the past days. Every revelation, every observation, every moment of betrayal had accumulated into a weight that pressed on his chest. Yet beneath the exhaustion, a sense of clarity had begun to emerge. For the first time, Robert realized that life would never return to the way it had been. The illusions of trust and security had been shattered, and though the pain was sharp, he understood that facing the truth was liberating. The confrontation with Elizabeth had brought the hidden reality into the open. He could no longer live in denial or ignorance. The choice before him was no longer about whether he wanted to believe, it was about what he would do next. He thought about Elizabeth. The woman he had loved, trusted, and built a life with had crossed boundaries that could not be ignored. Her motives, excuses, and explanations could not erase the fact that his safety, health, and trust had been compromised. He realized that protecting himself, reclaiming control over his life, and setting boundaries was no longer optional, it was essential. Lila, the young girl who had been the first to recognize the danger, had become his unexpected ally. Her courage in speaking the truth had been instrumental, and he reflected on how a single voice, a single act of honesty, had changed everything. He felt a deep sense of gratitude mixed with determination. He would not let deception thrive in his life again, and he would take every necessary step to ensure his well-being. The first step, he knew, was distance. Robert began making careful decisions about his interactions with Elizabeth. He avoided heated confrontations and emotional arguments, understanding that clarity came not from anger, but from careful observation and firm boundaries. He limited the opportunities for further manipulation while gathering his thoughts, creating a space where he could think clearly and act decisively. Next, he focused on rebuilding control over his personal life. Meals, routines, and daily interactions, all the small, overlooked aspects of life, became a way to regain his confidence. He monitored his environment with precision, ensuring that trust was earned, not assumed. Every detail mattered, and Robert became meticulous, not out of paranoia, but out of necessity. The emotional processing was perhaps the hardest part. Trust, once broken, is difficult to repair, and Robert knew that forgiveness would not come quickly or easily. He allowed himself to feel the full range of emotions, anger, sadness, betrayal, and disappointment, but he refused to let them consume him. He journaled his thoughts, reflected on past events, and considered the lessons learned. Each entry brought him closer to understanding that strength was not just in wealth or power, but in the clarity to recognize deception, the courage to confront it, and the resolve to protect oneself. As days turned into weeks, Robert's life began to shift. He surrounded himself with people he could truly trust, created new routines, and focused on personal growth and self-care. The mansion, once a symbol of luxury and illusion, became a place of self-awareness and empowerment. He no longer saw it as a gilded cage, but as a domain where he could reclaim agency and live intentionally. He also reflected on the broader lesson of the ordeal. Trust is fragile, he realized, and appearances can be deceiving. Even those closest to us may harbor secrets or hidden motives, and vigilance, courage, and awareness are necessary to navigate life wisely. The betrayal, while painful, had been a catalyst for growth. Robert emerged stronger, more perceptive, and more determined to live a life guided by clarity rather than assumption. Finally, Robert made a conscious choice. He would no longer dwell on the pain of betrayal, nor would he seek revenge. Instead, he focused on his own well-being, the people who had proven trustworthy, and the lessons learned. The confrontation had resolved the question of truth, and now he was free to decide how to move forward. He understood that life was unpredictable, but with awareness and courage, he could navigate even the darkest revelations and emerge resilient. As night fell over the mansion, Robert felt a sense of quiet determination. The past could not be erased, but it could be acknowledged, understood, and transformed into wisdom. He had faced deception, recognized it, and taken steps to protect himself. In that clarity, there was strength, and in that strength, there was freedom. The resolution was not just about confronting betrayal, it was about reclaiming control, embracing truth, and stepping into a life defined by awareness and resilience, rather than illusions and fear. After weeks of tension, investigation, and confrontation, the mansion was finally quiet. The storm that had upended Robert's life had passed, leaving behind clarity, understanding, and a new perspective. Sitting alone in his study, he reflected on everything that had happened, the subtle signs he had ignored, the courage of the young girl who had spoken the truth, the betrayal he had faced, and the decisions he had made in the aftermath. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of calm, not because the pain was gone, but because he understood it. Robert realized that life often presents lessons in the most unexpected ways. He had spent years focused on wealth, status, and appearances, believing that success could protect him from harm. Yet, the experience had shown him a truth far more valuable: no amount of money or power can shield a person from deceit or betrayal. Awareness, vigilance, and courage are far more important than the trappings of luxury. He understood that life is fragile, trust is delicate, and clarity is a gift that must be nurtured. He thought about Elizabeth, the woman he had once loved and trusted completely. The betrayal had been painful, yes, but it had also been illuminating. He realized that people are complex, and motives are often hidden beneath layers of habit, fear, or selfishness. Understanding that did not excuse the actions, but it allowed him to process the experience without being consumed by anger. He had learned that holding on to bitterness would only weigh him down, whereas learning from the experience could strengthen him. Lila, the young assistant who had noticed what no one else did, had been a quiet force in his journey toward truth. Her courage reminded Robert that even a small voice can create a profound impact. Sometimes, the people who observe quietly, who notice the details others ignore, are the ones who illuminate hidden dangers. Gratitude and respect for her insight filled him. Without her, he might still have been blind to the reality lurking in his own home. Robert reflected on the subtle ways life communicates truths. The unusual pauses in his meals, the faint taste differences, the hidden signals in everyday interactions, they had all been messages, if only he had been attentive enough to listen. This realization became a guiding principle for him: never ignore the small signs, never dismiss intuition, and never underestimate the value of observation. These lessons were worth more than any business deal, luxury possession, or social accolade he had ever achieved. He also considered the nature of trust. Trust is not a guarantee, Robert thought, it is a choice, continually reaffirmed by honesty, integrity, and respect. He had learned that blind trust can be dangerous, and vigilance does not equal paranoia, it equals wisdom. The experience had strengthened his ability to recognize patterns, analyze situations, and make decisions with clarity rather than assumption. In this way, betrayal became a teacher, guiding him toward a more aware and resilient life. The moral of his journey crystallized in his mind. Life is unpredictable, and people are rarely exactly what they seem. Appearances can be deceiving, and even the closest relationships require attention, observation, and conscious effort to maintain. When deception arises, courage and careful reflection are essential tools for navigating the aftermath. Robert realized that facing the truth, no matter how painful, was far more empowering than remaining in denial or pretending everything was fine. By the time night fell, Robert felt a sense of peace. He understood that the mansion, the wealth, and the appearances of a perfect life were not what truly mattered. What mattered was clarity, awareness, and the ability to act decisively when faced with uncertainty. He had survived deception, confronted it, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. The lessons he had learned were deeply personal, yet universal in their value. Trust wisely, observe carefully, act courageously, and never ignore the subtle truths that life presents. As he looked out at the city lights sparkling below, Robert felt gratitude for the painful lessons, for the courage of those who had helped him, and for the opportunity to move forward with insight and strength. He knew the past could not be changed, but the future was his to shape. And with that thought, he smiled quietly to himself, knowing that the truth, once revealed and faced, was the greatest freedom of all.